She walked into the billionaire's office, pretending to be her mother. But when he read her resume, he froze. What he discovered changed everything. The apartment door barely held onto its hinges, creaking like an old man's knees every time it swung open. Inside, the air was thick with dampness and silence, a silence only broken by the soft, uneven breathing of a woman lying on a tattered couch. Her name was Avrela Lorraine, once radiant and strong, now frail and sunken, with a scarf wrapped around her head where her chestnut curls used to fall. Chemotherapy had taken its toll, but poverty had taken more. 17-year-old Emery Lorraine stood in the narrow hallway, fingers trembling as she tore open the envelope she had just pulled from the mailbox downstairs. The golden logo embossed at the top stopped her breath cold. Northfall Industries, the most powerful tech company on the East Coast. She had mailed out the resume weeks ago, not as herself, but in her mother's name, out of desperation, out of hope. They had no income, no savings, and the hospital bills arrived with the same regularity as the sun. She read the letter once, then again. Her heart pounded louder with each line. Dear Ms. Avrela Lorraine, we were impressed by your resume. We would like to invite you to an in-person interview at our corporate headquarters on Monday at 9 a.m. Her knees nearly buckled. She looked over her shoulder at her mother, curled beneath a thin blanket with sunken eyes, fluttering in a restless sleep. Avrela hadn't left the apartment in days. Some mornings, she couldn't even hold down water, let alone attend a job interview at a gleaming skyscraper uptown. Emery's fingers tightened around the letter. She walked to the tiny bathroom, turned on the flickering light, and faced the cracked mirror. Her reflection stared back, youthful, sharp-boned, worn beyond her years. Her dark eyes were full of fight, but her cheeks bore the quiet stamp of exhaustion. She ran her fingers through her messy curls and pulled them into a neat bun. She tried on her mother's faded blazer, which sagged a little at the shoulders, but looked decent enough. The blouse underneath was buttoned all the way to the collar to appear more mature. Lipstick, only a touch. She looked older, maybe old enough. She took a shaky breath. Mama, she whispered, kneeling by the couch. Avrela stirred faintly. I got a letter from Northfall. They want an interview. I sent them your resume. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to give you false hope. Her mother barely opened her eyes. Emery, no. You can't. I have to. Emery clutched her hand. They think you're going, but you can't go, so I will. Just let me try. Avrela's hand squeezed hers, weak, almost weightless. You'll get caught. Maybe, maybe not. But if there's even a 1% chance they don't notice, Mama, we can't keep living like this. We can't keep losing. She stood, heart hammering with terror and adrenaline. She had never lied like this. She had never pretended to be someone else. But she had also never had a real shot to change their lives. That night, Emery sat at the small kitchen table with her mother's resume in one hand and a cheap pen in the other. She made small edits, fixed spelling, added a few things that weren't entirely true, like administrative assistant for a local logistics company, and fluent in Excel. She wasn't fluent in anything except survival, but she would figure it out. When dawn broke over the city, Emery didn't look back. She packed the letter, the resume, and her mother's ID card into a thrift store handbag, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward a building she never dreamed she'd step inside. She wasn't just walking into an interview. She was walking into a lie, dressed in desperation and hope. The taxi ride to Northfall headquarters felt like a journey through two different worlds. Emery sat rigidly in the back seat, watching as cracked sidewalks and graffiti-stained brick buildings gave way to clean glass towers and sleek electric cars. She had never been this far uptown. The driver didn't speak, and she was grateful. Her hands were clammy, her pulse erratic, and she couldn't stop silently rehearsing the answers to questions she had no idea how to answer. When the car pulled up in front of the Northfall Tower, she froze. The building was monstrous, a modern cathedral made of silver and glass. Its mirrored facade caught the sun like a knife and reflected the sky back onto the people below. People who moved quickly with purpose, dressed in suits that probably cost more than everything Emery and her mother owned combined. She paid the driver with her last $20, stepped out, and immediately felt the weight of this place settle onto her chest. Everyone around her looked important, polished, powerful. And there she stood in a blazer one size too big and shoes that pinched at the heels because they weren't hers. but she lifted her chin and walked toward the revolving glass doors. Inside, the lobby was an ocean of marble and chrome. A waterfall trickled down a glass wall to her left, and a massive steel sculpture hung suspended from the ceiling like a floating galaxy. The floor gleamed under her feet, and the silence buzzed with wealth. A woman at the reception desk gave her a once-over, but didn't say anything beyond a professional, "Welcome to Northfall Industries." Name? Emery took a breath. Avrella Lorraine. I have an interview scheduled at 9 Cout. The receptionist tapped on her keyboard, then nodded with a pleasant smile. You're on the list. You'll be going to the 56th floor. Executive wing. Executive. The word hit like a cold slap. A security guard guided her toward the elevators and handed her a temporary visitor badge. Her hands shook slightly as she clipped it to her jacket. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a sleek interior with walls of ebony wood and ambient lighting. Emery stepped inside alone. As the elevator ascended, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. Her heart pounded harder with every floor. At 30, she clenched her fists. At 40, she started to sweat. By the time it reached 56, she was swallowing dry fear like bitter medicine. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a quiet hallway lined with matte black walls and glowing white panels. Everything smelled like citrus and power. A tall woman with a headset and a sleek black dress approached. Ms. Lorraine, right this way, please. Mr. Gravel is expecting you. That name. Axton Gravel. She had researched him, of course. CEO of Northfall, former Silicon Valley prodigy, self-made billionaire by age 32. She had seen his face 100 times online. Cold blue eyes, a chiseled jawline, always impeccably dressed in dark suits. People said he was brilliant. People also said he had no soul. As the assistant led her down a corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence, Emery whispered a silent prayer. That he wouldn't look too closely, that her blazer wouldn't betray her, that her voice wouldn't crack. The office door had stood slightly ajar. The assistant knocked once, then pushed it open. Ms. Lorraine is here, sir. Send her in, came a voice that was smooth, commanding, almost bored. Emery stepped inside. The room was cavernous, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that opened up to a skyline bathed in morning light. He sat behind a massive desk, laptop open, a glass of still water beside it. He didn't look up right away. Instead, he studied something on his screen, giving her just enough time to observe him in real life. He was younger than she expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp, unreadable features. His hair was dark and combed back meticulously, and his suit was charcoal gray, tailored to perfection. When he finally looked up, their eyes met. Something in his gaze flickered for a moment. Confusion, perhaps. But it was gone too fast for her to interpret. Ms. Lorraine, he said, standing and offering a hand. His grip was firm, but not cruel. His eyes, however, searched hers with the kind of precision that made her stomach drop. Please, have a seat. She did, perching on the edge of the leather chair across from him, clutching the envelope that held her mother's resume. May I? He asked, gesturing. She slid the envelope forward. He opened it in one motion, unfolding the resume and scanning it in silence. A full minute passed, then another. She didn't breathe. When he finally looked up, his brow was ever so slightly furrowed. You've had an unconventional work history. Emery nodded carefully. Yes, sir. But I'm adaptable. And fast. I've always had to be. His eyes narrowed. Not cruelly, but with curiosity. Your resume mentions clerical work, time management under pressure, and administrative coordination. You worked at Storn Logistics for 4 years? Yes, she said, trying to steady her voice. Small company, high demand. I did a lot of multitasking. Why did you leave? She hesitated for the briefest second. My daughter got sick, and I had to care for her full time. But she's doing better now. The lie left a bitter taste in her mouth. But it was a lie forged from truth, just reversed. He studied her again, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he set the resume down. You're not 48. She froze. Her stomach turned cold. His voice was still calm, still quiet. But there was steel behind it. You're not Avrella Lorraine, are you? The silence in the room became suffocating. Emery felt like every atom of her body was about to implode. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. But before she could speak, he said something that shocked her even more. You're not the first person to lie in this building. But you might be the first one to do it with a reason I'd like to hear. The words hit her like a thunderclap. You're not the first person to lie in this building, but you might be the first one to do it with a reason I'd like to hear. Emery sat frozen, mouth slightly open, her pulse roaring in her ears. The polished leather chair beneath her suddenly felt like a trap. Every part of her screamed to run. She had been found out. She had failed. But then, his voice, calm, unhurried, cut through the panic again. Well, Axton Gravel leaned back in his chair, folding his hands neatly in front of him. You came all the way here, borrowed your mother's identity, forged a resume, and tried to sit through a high-level executive interview. That takes either guts or desperation. Which one is it? She swallowed, her throat dry as sandpaper. There was no point denying it now. Her stomach twisted with shame, but somewhere underneath that, faint, flickering, was the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. Desperation, she said quietly. He arched an eyebrow. Go on. Emery drew a shaky breath. My name is Emery Lorraine. I'm 17. I'm a senior in high school. And yes, I lied to get here. I used my mother's name. Because she can't walk more than 5 steps without needing to sit down. Because we've sold almost everything we own just to keep the lights on. Because our fridge has a carton of milk and 3 slices of stale bread, and our landlord said this is the last month he's going to wait. She stopped, her voice catching. But she pushed through. My mother was a receptionist her whole life. She's smart, kind, never missed a day of work, and now she's sick. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. She doesn't have the strength to come here and beg for a job, but I do. Axton didn't interrupt. His face was unreadable, but something in his gaze had shifted. Softened, maybe, or sharpened in a different way. Emery forced herself to hold his eyes. I know I'm not qualified. I've never worked in an office, but I've been managing our bills, appointments, phone calls, prescriptions, all while keeping my grades up and caring for my mom. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a chance. Silence stretched in the room. The city buzzed quietly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, time felt suspended. Axton slowly reached for her resume again and flipped it over, staring at the blank backside like it might offer answers. How did you even get here? He asked at last, his voice quiet. I took a taxi. I used the last of our grocery money. He gave a short exhale through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. You realize what could have happened if security had flagged you? Or if I'd called the police for identity fraud? She nodded. Yes. And you still did it? Yes. For the first time since she entered the building, a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. It vanished just as quickly. I've been in this office for almost 10 years, he said slowly. I've seen 1,000 people walk through that door with Ivy League degrees and boardroom buzzwords. Most of them wanted a bigger paycheck or a better parking spot. You're the first one who walked in here trying to survive. She didn't know what to say. Her heart thumped against her ribs, like a prisoner trying to escape. He stood and walked over to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Emery watched him, unsure whether she was about to be escorted out by security or offered something she didn't dare hope for. My mother, he said suddenly without turning, worked in a diner until the day she collapsed. 3 jobs, no vacations, no weekends. Cancer took her in under a year. Emery's eyes widened. She hadn't read that anywhere. It wasn't in any article or bio. She never asked anyone for help, Axton continued. And by the time I had enough money to give her everything, she was already gone. He turned around and met her gaze again, this time with something entirely different in his eyes. Not pity, not anger, but a flicker of recognition. Why didn't you just tell the truth? He asked softly. Emery hesitated. Because no one listens to a 17-year-old from East Hollow with a sick mom and a fake blazer. They'd have thrown me out before I finished my name. He nodded slowly, then walked back to his desk. You lied, he said plainly, but you lied for the right reasons. And you're not stupid. You're resourceful. You think on your feet. You stayed calm when you were caught. Most grown men can't do that in this room. She blinked, unsure where this was going. I'm not offering your mother the job, he said. Her heart sank like a stone. I'm offering you a position, a 3-week trial, junior admin intern, part-time, after school. We'll see what you can do. She stared at him, breath caught in her throat. You're serious? I don't waste my time with jokes, Ms. Lorraine. She almost laughed at that. Almost. I can't pay you a full salary yet, but it'll be better than minimum wage. And we'll keep this arrangement between us, understood? Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding. Understood. He gave a single nod and reached for the phone on his desk. Peyton, he said into the receiver, get HR to draw up a provisional intern contract. Emery Lorraine, start date, today. He hung up, then looked at her with a half-amused, half-impressed expression. Welcome to Northfall, Emery. Try not to lie again. And just like that, the girl who had walked into the tower wearing someone else's name began her new life under her own. The first day wasn't magic. It was hard. After leaving Axton Gravel's office with a freshly printed intern badge clipped to her lapel, Emery was guided down a quieter corridor to a secondary office wing. Not the glamorous part with corner views and marble floors, but the more functional area, plain desks, clattering keyboards, and coffee-stained carpet. It was a stark reminder that she hadn't won anything yet, only a chance to prove herself. Her new supervisor, a sharply dressed woman in her late 30s named Corliss Henney, gave her a wary look when she arrived. You're the new trial intern Mr. Gravel mentioned? Emery nodded. Yes, ma'am. Emery Lorraine. Corliss scanned her like a barcode. Well, we don't usually get high school students sent directly from the top floor. Emery opened her mouth to explain, but Corliss raised a hand. Save it. I don't need the story. I need someone who can alphabetize files, take accurate phone messages, and make a proper coffee run without getting the entire order wrong. Think you're up for that? Yes, ma'am. Good. Get started. And just like that, she was handed a cardboard box stuffed with mixed files from the legal and HR departments. They weren't organized in any recognizable order. Half were upside down, some labeled with initials only, others water-stained and faded. Emery sat down at a dented metal desk and dove in. Hours passed. She didn't check her phone. She didn't get up. She didn't complain. Instead, she created a system. Labeled folders, sticky notes for urgent docs, color-coded tags using leftover highlighters she found in a drawer. She skipped lunch. Her hands grew sore from sorting. Her eyes stung from reading the tiny print. But when Corliss passed by and saw the neat stacks, her pace slowed just a fraction. You didn't just shove them back in drawers? No, ma'am, Emery said without looking up. They were misfiled. Some belonged to terminated employees. Others are from old vendor contracts. I flagged the ones that might need archiving. Corliss said nothing, but for a moment her expression softened. By 5:30, the office had mostly emptied. Emery gathered her things, her cheap bag, her worn-out coat, and walked the long hallway toward the elevator. She knew the last bus to East Hollow left at 6:10. Missing it would mean a cold 2-hour walk home. As she passed the glass-paneled meeting room near the executive wing, she paused. Axton Gravel was still there, seated at a massive oak conference table, alone, staring at a series of digital projections on the wall. Charts, graphs, spreadsheets. The kind of data Emery had always been taught was out of her league. But then he did something unexpected. He turned his head and looked straight at her. She froze, feeling like a child who'd wandered too far. Instead of scolding her, he motioned. Come in for a moment. Emery hesitated, then pushed open the door. I just finished organizing the documents from legal, she said, not sure why she spoke first. There were 3 sealed ones marked internal eyes only. I didn't open them. They're on Corliss Henn's desk. Good instinct, Axton said, nodding. She looked around the conference room, then back at him. Do you work this late every day? Most days. Why? He gave her a look that was half bemused, half sad. Because success is expensive, and it doesn't pay in sleep. She nodded quietly, absorbing that. Then, to her own surprise, she added, My mom used to say something like that. She said the hardest work often gets done when no one's watching. Axton tilted his head slightly. She sounds like a wise woman. She is, just tired. A long silence followed. Emery realized she had crossed an invisible line, one she couldn't quite define. But he didn't seem angry. In fact, he seemed thoughtful. Finally, he gestured to a chair. Sit for a second. She blinked. I thought I might miss the bus. I'll have someone drive you, he said, cutting her off gently. Just sit. She obeyed. He pulled up a new screen. This one wasn't business projections or financial graphs. It was a resume template. Let me show you something, he said, and he began to explain. Not the corporate language of stock reports and quarterly growth, but real strategy. How a resume is designed to highlight a person's value. How presentation can sometimes matter just as much as truth. He explained why some resumes, though impressive, were immediately forgettable, and why hers, even with the lies, had caught his eye. You wrote from the gut, he said. It wasn't clean. It wasn't technically polished. But it bled, and I remembered it. Emery listened like someone starving for knowledge. But if you want to survive here longer than 3 weeks, he continued, you'll need more than instinct. You need skill. I can learn, she said quickly. I know you can, he said. That's why I'm telling you this. He tapped the resume on the screen. Every word you ever write from now on, every email, memo, application, must be a mirror of your discipline, not just your emotion. This is Northfall. We don't give second chances here, but sometimes, rarely, we make an exception. He closed the projection and stood. I'll arrange a ride. Don't be late tomorrow. Emery stood, heart pounding, unsure if this had been a warning or a gift, or both. Thank you, she whispered. As she left the room, a company driver was already waiting at the entrance. She slid into the back seat of a warm black sedan, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. The city lights shimmered outside as they drove. Somewhere in the distance, her mother was probably awake, worrying. Tomorrow would be just as hard, maybe harder, but Emery now knew something she hadn't known this morning. She was no longer invisible. The next morning arrived with biting wind and a pale gray sky that hung low over the city like a warning. Emery stood in the cramped kitchen of their apartment, tying her hair into a neat bun in front of a smudged mirror above the sink. The scarf her mother had worn yesterday now sat around her own neck, a quiet promise that she would carry her strength into the day. Avrela watched from the kitchen table, wrapped in 2 layers of sweaters and still shivering. Her skin was pale, the hollows beneath her eyes darker than ever. You came home after midnight, her mother said softly. I stayed late, Emery replied, tucking in the corners of her worn blouse. Mr. Gravel was showing me how to rewrite a resume. Avrela blinked. He took time to teach you that. Emery hesitated, then nodded. He's not what I thought. He's not what anyone thinks. A bitter smile curved her mother's lips. Men with money rarely are. They don't owe you kindness, Em. Don't let a crack of sympathy fool you into trusting too fast. I'm not, Emery said. But I also know when someone means it. He could have had me thrown out. He didn't. She poured the last of their cereal into a paper cup and grabbed a banana for the bus ride. Then, before leaving, she knelt beside her mother and reached for her hand. When I get paid, she whispered, we'll get you a proper coat. And new meds, I promise. Avrela brushed a hand over her daughter's cheek. Her fingers were cold. I trust you, baby. Just don't lose yourself trying to save me. Emery nodded and hurried out the door, heart already racing with the weight of what the day would demand. When she arrived at Northfall, Corliss Henny was waiting with a clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable as always. I hope you know what a payroll audit is, she said without greeting. Emery blinked. I don't yet, but I can learn fast. Corliss didn't smile, but something flickered in her eyes. Then start with this. She handed her a heavy binder labeled Q1 Payroll Corrections and pointed toward a desk in the finance wing. Every discrepancy needs to be logged in this spreadsheet. Names, departments, amounts. Cross-check everything. Do not make a single error. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Emery took the binder with both hands, sat down at a desk wedged between 2 senior accountants, and opened the first page. It was chaos. Handwritten notes in multiple pens, outdated forms, missing signatures. For the first 20 minutes, she felt like she was drowning in a language she didn't speak. But she didn't give up. She broke the problem down like a puzzle, line by line. By noon, she had flagged 3 duplicate payments and traced 2 errors back to a misfiled department code. When she showed Corliss her work, the woman stared at the spreadsheet, then at her. You did this on your own? I double-checked it. I think the issue starts with how they entered part-time status retroactively. Corliss slowly set the papers down. For the first time, she didn't look skeptical. She looked intrigued. At 3:20 p.m., Emery was summoned to the executive floor. Her stomach knotted as she stepped into the elevator. She wasn't sure if this was a promotion or a firing. When she arrived, Peyton, the same assistant who greeted her that first day, smiled faintly and waved her through. He's expecting you. Inside the office, Axton Gravel stood near the window, arms crossed, looking out at the city like it held secrets only he could see. "You've caused a stir," he said without turning. "Finance called. Said you caught a $20,000 overpayment issue that slipped past 2 managers." Emery stiffened. "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone." He finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't. You showed initiative. That's the one trait I can't train into people." She exhaled just a little. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I want to offer you something," he said as she sat. "It's not a job. Not yet. But it's more than what you're doing." He pulled out a slim manila folder and slid it across the desk. Inside was a document with the title, Special Apprenticeship Program, Executive Pathway. Emery's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. It wasn't just a higher hourly rate. It included training modules, mentorship, weekly evaluations, and most shocking of all, a small monthly stipend for housing assistance. "I created this program 3 years ago," Axton explained, "but it's only ever had 3 participants. I don't hand this out lightly. You're 17. You lied your way into my building, but you've outperformed employees twice your age in under 72 hours. Her eyes welled up. "I want to accept," she said immediately. He raised a hand. "Don't rush. Read every line. Talk to your mother. You have until tomorrow." She nodded, heart thudding so loudly it nearly drowned out the rest of the world. When she left the office, everything felt different. The hallways were still the same. The faces, the cold lighting, the glass walls. But for the first time, she didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like someone who belonged. That night back in the apartment, she laid the folder in front of her mother. Avrela stared at the pages for a long time. Her hands trembled as she touched the words. Then, softly, she said, "You did this. Not me. You walked into a world that never made space for girls like you, and carved out a seat anyway." Emery smiled through tears. "It's not a seat yet, just a chance." Her mother nodded, her voice a whisper, "Then take it, and never look back." The following week was a whirlwind. Emery officially accepted the apprenticeship offer the next morning, her signature trembling slightly as she signed the document that could alter the course of her life. Her mother had watched her do it with quiet pride and eyes that shimmered with unspoken fear. It wasn't the fear of failure, it was the fear of change, of letting her daughter carry too much, too fast. Northfall Industries didn't pause to celebrate. As soon as Emery stepped back into the building, she was ushered into the world behind the world, the hidden engine that powered the empire. She was assigned to a hybrid schedule, 4 hours a day in finance and compliance, 2 hours shadowing someone new each week in a different department, marketing, operations, even legal. The learning curve was brutal. Her first rotation was under a woman named Roseanne Keene, the head of risk management, a 50-year-old former FBI analyst with a stare sharp enough to slice paper. Roseanne didn't tolerate mistakes, questions that had already been answered, or employees who breathed like tourists. Emery understood immediately that this was a test, maybe the hardest one yet. Roseanne handed her a file on her first day with 3 words: "Find the leak." It was a financial discrepancy involving a contract with an outside security firm. Emery pored over spreadsheets, scanned approval chains, and even went line by line through receipts for outsourced surveillance hardware. For 2 days, she barely blinked. Her eyes stung from blue light, and her brain buzzed with numbers in her dreams. And then she found it. One invoice had a mismatched timestamp that didn't align with any known shipping or payment dates. It had been duplicated, slightly altered, and resent as a new charge 2 weeks later. She brought the report to Roseanne with annotated evidence and a printed timeline. The woman looked at her like she was seeing a ghost. "Do you know how many people missed this?" she asked slowly. Emery shook her head. 7, including me. Roseanne handed the file to her assistant and looked at Emery for a long moment. "You're dangerous," she finally said. It was the highest compliment Emery had ever received. Word started spreading through the halls. The girl from East Hollow. The one with no college degree, no references, no pedigree, but with eyes that saw patterns others missed. Some people whispered behind her back. Others tested her, baited her with subtle digs or snide comments about charity interns. Emery didn't flinch. She worked harder, smarter, quieter. Then came Friday. She was asked to join a private strategy meeting on the executive floor. That alone was rare. Even junior managers didn't always get invited. When she walked in, Axton Gravel was already seated at the end of a long table, flanked by 4 other department heads. She recognized one of them. Levi Torrance, head of corporate investments. A tall, clean-shaven man with slick hair and a voice like velvet dipped in poison. Emery had passed him in hallways before. He never spoke to her. Today, he stared at her like she didn't belong. Axton gestured for her to sit. "Emery," he said, "I want you to walk us through the redundancy strategy you drafted for the Western security contracts." Her throat closed for a moment. She hadn't expected to speak. She thought she was here to observe. But then she remembered her mother's words. "Don't lose yourself trying to save me." She cleared her throat, opened her tablet, and began. "I found that Northfall is currently paying 3 security subcontractors to cover the same Tier 2 warehouse sectors in San Diego, Sacramento, and Phoenix. According to the service-level agreements, only one firm is actually required for each region. The other 2 are ghost redundancies, billing for monitoring, but not providing separate coverage." Levi interrupted with a scoff. "Well, that's intentional redundancy for asset protection. We've used that model since 2019. Emery looked at him evenly. "Then it's outdated. 2 of the locations are now supported by in-house drone surveillance. The third one has active sensor grids that already alert our internal teams directly. The redundancies you're referring to are no longer defensive. They're just expensive." The room went silent. Even Axton raised his brows slightly. Roseanne Keene let out a slow exhale, then cracked the faintest of smiles. Levi leaned back in his chair, his lips tight. "She's right," Axton said after a moment. "I had the numbers cross-checked this morning. Emery's projections are accurate." He turned to her. "I'll need a formal cost elimination proposal on my desk by Monday. Can you do it?" "Yes, sir." He nodded. "Then we're done here." As the others began to stand, Emery collected her notes, adrenaline still pumping through her veins. As she turned to leave, Roseanne placed a hand briefly on her shoulder and whispered, "You just embarrassed a man who hasn't been corrected in 10 years. Be careful." Later that evening, as the office cleared out and the sky outside turned copper with sunset, Axton called her back into his office. She sat across from him again, this time with less fear and more weight on her shoulders. "You've been here 2 weeks," he said, "and you've already saved this company more than most analysts do in a quarter." "I'm just doing what I know how to do," Emery replied. "Connecting dots." "You've got instincts that can't be taught," he said, "but there's something else I need to ask." He pulled out a photo, a black and white snapshot, faded at the edges. It was of a woman, young, smiling, strong cheekbones. Her eyes were Emery's. "I found this in the archives," Axton said, "from over 18 years ago. She applied to be my personal assistant when I was just starting Northfall. We had one meeting. Her name was Avrilla Lorraine." Emery's chest tightened. "I didn't recognize her then," he continued. But when you walked in that day, something stirred. I didn't understand it at the time, but now I can't ignore it." He looked at her, his voice lowering. "Tell me the truth, Emery. Who is she to me?" Emery couldn't speak. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled in her lap. Then, quietly, she whispered, "She never told me who my father was. Only that he left. That he never knew." Axton didn't move. He simply stared at the photograph, then at Emery. The silence between them was no longer professional. It was ancestral. Something old, something buried. He didn't ask for a DNA test. He didn't explode with disbelief. He simply said, "I think we both deserve to know the truth." And in that moment, Emery realized this apprenticeship wasn't just about her future. It might be the key to unlocking her past. Emery barely slept that night. The moment she returned home, her legs gave out beneath her and she sank to the kitchen floor, her back pressed against the cupboard, the quiet hum of the refrigerator masking the sound of her shallow breaths. She held the photo Axton had given her in trembling hands, tracing the edges of the image with her thumb. Her mother, so young in it, so bright-eyed, her smile wide and unguarded. Emery had never seen this photo before. The version of her mother she knew had been shaped by exhaustion, illness, and disappointment. This photo showed a woman still full of possibility. She stared at the other figure in the photo, blurred in the corner, just his hand on her shoulder and a bit of his jaw visible. But now she understood. That was him. Axton Gravel. Before the wealth, before the reputation, just a man and a dream. And maybe a moment with a woman who would become the mother of his child. When Avrella shuffled into the kitchen that morning, Emery hadn't moved. Her eyes were red and puffy. "What's wrong?" her mother asked instantly, her voice sharp despite its weakness. Emery stood up slowly and placed the photo on the table. Her mother froze. One look was all it took. "Where did you get that?" Avrela whispered. "He gave it to me," Emery said softly. "Yesterday." Said he found it in the archives. Avrela sat down hard, as if her legs could no longer hold her. Her hands trembled as she reached for the photograph. "You told me he never knew," Emery said, her voice cracking. "Was that true? Or was that to protect me?" A long silence followed. Finally, Avrela exhaled, the breath hitching in her chest. "It was both," she said. "He didn't know. But I also didn't tell him. I found out I was pregnant weeks after that interview. I'd never heard from him again. He was already rising fast, in papers, in tech blogs. His world was changing. Ours never did." Emery's throat tightened. "Why didn't you try to reach him?" Avrela's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was scared. Because I didn't want to be a mistake in the middle of his success story. And because I didn't want him to feel forced. You were never a burden to me, Emery. I chose you every single day." The weight of the truth pressed down on them both. It was a beautiful kind of pain, one wrapped in sacrifice and silent love. Emery sat beside her mother and took her hand. "I think he knows now," she whispered. "Or at least he suspects. He didn't ask for proof. Just looked at me like he saw something he didn't understand until now." Avrela nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "He deserves to know. But on your terms, not his. Not anyone else's." The next day at Northfall felt different. There were no whispers this time, no rumors. People respected her now, sometimes begrudgingly, sometimes in awe. But the tension had shifted. Even Corliss, the once skeptical supervisor, offered a small nod of approval as Emery passed her in the hallway. But her mind was elsewhere. Axton hadn't called her into his office all morning. She wondered if he was waiting for her to make the next move. By lunchtime, she found herself standing outside his office door, staring at the sleek black panel like it might bite her. She took a breath, knocked once, and entered when she heard his familiar, low voice say, "Come in." He was standing by the window again, as if always caught between looking out at the world and staying buried in his thoughts. "I need to know," Emery said without preamble, her voice steady. "Not just about me, about you, about her." He turned slowly, his face unreadable. "I don't know how much you've guessed," she said, "but my mother never took anything from you. Not money, not even your name. She raised me by herself, completely. She said you didn't know, and I believe her." Axton walked over and sat across from her, his posture guarded, but his eyes searching. "I've spent my whole life building something no one could take away from me," he said. "I never stopped to think about what I might have left behind along the way." Emery felt something in her throat catch. "You didn't leave me." "Not really. You just didn't know I existed." He nodded slowly, then pulled something from the drawer of his desk. A small velvet box. He opened it carefully and placed it on the table between them. Inside was a necklace, a simple silver chain with a charm, two interlocking stars. "I bought this years ago," he said quietly. "I don't know why. I saw it in a shop window and thought, someday if I had a daughter, I'd give it to her." Emery's hand trembled as she reached for it. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Humble, not flashy or expensive, just honest. "I don't expect you to call me anything," he said, "or feel something you don't. But I want to know you, Emery, not as an intern, not as a business decision, as whatever this is." She looked at him then, really looked, past the tailored suits, the media persona, the headlines. She saw a man who had worked to keep his soul hidden behind glass and ambition. A man who didn't know he had a daughter until it stared him in the face with his own eyes. "I want to know you too," she whispered. There was no dramatic embrace, no tears spilled across his desk. Just a shared silence that meant more than any words could. And in that silence, the world shifted. For Emery, the girl who had once forged a resume to save her mother, and for Axton, the man who thought he had everything, until he realized he'd been missing the one thing that made it all make sense. The following weeks unfolded like a second life, layered over the first. Emery continued her apprenticeship at Northfall with a renewed sense of purpose. But now it wasn't just about survival. It was about identity. Every spreadsheet, every budget forecast, every staff rotation became more than just tasks on a corporate to-do list. She wasn't just an intern anymore. She was a bridge between two worlds, the daughter of a woman who had built a life from ashes and the child of a man who had built a tower from ambition. Her relationship with Axton Gravel developed not in grand gestures, but in small, profound moments. One afternoon, he passed by the finance department and left a folded note on her desk. Just 3 words. Lunch? My treat. They sat in the company cafeteria together, drawing curious glances from staff too professional to ask questions. Emery didn't speak much that day, but Axton did. He told her about his mother's childhood in Detroit, how she'd work night shifts at a textile plant and still make him breakfast every morning, how he never truly understood sacrifice until it was too late. Your mother sounds a lot like mine, he had said quietly. Emery only nodded, her throat too tight for words. He didn't force fatherhood on her. He never pushed. Instead, he showed up, in little ways. A ride home when it rained, a book left on her desk about financial ethics, a quiet text late one evening. How's your mom doing? That question meant more than he would ever know. Avrila's condition remained fragile, but her spirits were different now. One evening, Emery came home to find her mother sitting by the window, sketching in a notebook she hadn't touched in years. It was a drawing of Emery, standing in front of a tall glass building, one hand outstretched to the sky. When Emery saw it, she smiled with her whole soul. I haven't seen you draw since I was 10, she whispered. I didn't have the energy, Avrila replied, but now I do. You gave it back to me. By the end of the month, Axton asked Emery to meet him in one of the top-floor lounges, a quiet room with a piano, dark velvet chairs, and a skyline view that took your breath away. When she arrived, he was already seated at the piano, his fingers moving absently across the keys. I didn't know you played, she said as she stepped closer. I don't, he replied with a half-smile, but I like pretending I do. She sat beside him, the city sprawling out behind them like a painting. I've made a lot of decisions in my life, Axton said softly. Some brilliant, some selfish. But meeting your mother, even for that brief moment all those years ago, that wasn't a mistake. And you, Emery, you're the best consequence I never saw coming. She turned to him slowly, her eyes wet but steady. I never hated you, she said, even when I didn't know who you were. I used to imagine someone strong, someone far away. I just didn't think that person would actually find me back. He looked at her for a long moment and said almost shyly, I'd like to do this the right way. If you ever decide, no pressure, but if you want to, I'd be honored if you called me Dad. The word hung in the air like a fragile star. Emery didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window. The city was glowing. The world below moved on, unaware of the transformation happening in that quiet room. Finally, she nodded. Once. I think I'd like that, she whispered. Weeks turned into months. Emery stayed on at Northfall, and when her apprenticeship ended, she was offered a full scholarship by Axton to attend a top business university, with a part-time role at the company to keep her involved. Avrila's health stabilized, thanks to better treatment, funded quietly and without fanfare. The day Emery left for college, Axton met her at the station. He handed her a worn leather briefcase. Not new, not shiny, but clean, restored. Inside, taped to the lid, was the very first version of her forged resume, the one she had written for her mother, the one that started it all. You rewrote our story with this, he said. Never forget where you came from, but don't be afraid to go where you're meant to. She hugged him then, fully, fiercely, not as an employee, not as a secret, but as his daughter. And for the first time in her life, Emery boarded the train not as a girl running from a broken past, but as a young woman racing toward a future she'd built with her own hands. A future that had once seemed impossible. But now, it was real, because one forged resume had led her home. In my view, the ending of this story is not just satisfying, it's transformative. What began as a desperate act of survival blossomed into something far greater, the healing of a broken lineage. Emery's forged resume was more than a lie. It was an act of defiance against circumstance, a symbol of courage wrapped in ink and paper. And remarkably, that lie led to truth. Not just the truth of her parentage, but the truth of her own value, intelligence, and strength. What makes this ending powerful is its realism layered with hope. Emery doesn't win the lottery or become a CEO overnight. Instead, she earns everything through grit, compassion, and sheer will. Her relationship with Axton doesn't resolve into a fairy tale. It grows with time, honesty, and vulnerability. That's what makes their final embrace so moving. It's not a miracle. It's a choice, a decision to love, to forgive, and to move forward. In a world where so many young people like Emery are overlooked or underestimated, this story is a tribute to those who carry more than their share far too early and still rise. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of bravery, a girl walking into a tower wearing someone else's name, can rewrite an entire future.